Hello and welcome to This Really Happened, a place where unbelievable, heart-touching true stories come to life. Sometimes surprising, sometimes bittersweet, always real. Grab a drink and settle in. We're about to begin. Eleanor Peterson stepped towards the coffee machine, intending to make herself a double portion of scalding, strong coffee, capable of bringing her back to life. She was scheduled to be on duty in the emergency room that night, and the interrupted sleep in snatches, half an hour between calls, remained an unattainable art for her. Was that rest? Only the nimble nurse Chloe, nicknamed Morocco, with whom the children's ambulance doctor had gone through many difficult situations, could joke about napping, saying, "Uncle Reuben has come to visit me again, chopping me up even as I walk." Coffee no longer helped, and energy drinks in colourful metal cans, alas, were powerless against fatigue, and their composition left much to be desired. When a child's life somewhere in the city hung by a thread, balancing over an abyss, Chloe knew how to gather her strength. The doctor merely thought admiringly, "Iron nerves, iron character," remembering a phrase as if from a cartoon or an old song. To herself, she mentally added, "and a golden heart of immense size, capable of containing love for the whole world." After each return from a call, Chloe and their driver, George, fell asleep instantly. Barely had their heads touched the pillows on the sofas in the break room. But the head of the crew, Eleanor Peterson, always remained on duty, in constant readiness for battle. Eleanor cupped the still steaming mug in her hands, inhaled the beloved aroma, and thought with pleasure, "I'll come home after my shift, and I won't have to cook. A couple of cutlets and the leftovers of yesterday's mashed potatoes are waiting in the fridge. My husband Michael rushed off on a business trip this morning. 3 days of culinary freedom for the parrots." The woman stretched her legs onto the coffee table, watching her assistant sweetly dozing under the monotonous hum of the air conditioner. The summer had turned out unbearably hot, and the unit had been working non-stop for days, as if possessed. Where did it draw its mechanical power from? George snored peacefully in his sleep. Everyone at the station knew about his infatuation with Chloe, but for some reason he couldn't bring himself to confess his feelings. A healthy man, almost 2 meters tall, who had served in hotspots under contract, who had lost his shallow wife after being wounded, a wife who didn't want to see a freak with a scar across his cheek at home. In the presence of the lively nurse, the seasoned George turned into a timid lamb, stumbled over his answers to her questions, and flushed red at accidental touches. Eleanor Peterson smiled, remembering how her Michael had circled around her with interest almost 20 years ago. He approached her in the park, where she was cramming Latin on a spring day before an exam at the medical institute. "May I sit here? Is the spot on the bench next to you free?" The beautiful brown-haired Eleanor's grey-green eyes sparkled, and she moved her thick briefcase with textbooks. "And why didn't the neighbouring benches appeal to you? There are so many free spots over there." "This bench needs pants," the sturdy Michael mumbled, blushing all over. "Then my arguments are exhausted," the girl chuckled. "Shall we introduce ourselves then? I see you're unlikely to take the initiative yourself." Offering a palm damp with nervousness, the young man said a little fearfully, "Michael, that is, you can call me Mike." He didn't shake her hand, instead frantically wiping the moisture on his light summer trousers. Eleanor lightly touched his hand with her fingertips and said, "And I'm Eleanor, for short, Ellie. Sometimes my friends call me Ellybug." The nickname, which had stuck with her since childhood, instantly diffused the tense atmosphere. Michael smiled happily and said, "I'd like to earn the right to call you Ellybug too, which means becoming your friend. And let's use you." Let's, the girl replied. What's the point of these bows and ceremonies at our age? That day, Eleanor had to rush back to the dormitory so her head would be clear for the boring Latin exam the next day. She and Michael agreed that he would wait for her near the institute. If she passed successfully, they would go for ice cream and pastries at the confectionery on the boulevard. A red light flashed on the ambulance station's console. The dispatcher quickly recorded the information on the computer screen, simultaneously making notes in the work journal. Crew for a call. Address, Grigoriev. The details have been sent to the app. Hurry. House on the outskirts of the city. Little girl is suffocating. Parents can't understand the cause of the sudden attack. Quickly putting on her medical uniform, Chloe was already rushing down the stairs from the second floor. Eleanor Peterson, I grabbed the bag, even managed to shove your file folder in there. Let's not waste time. I have a feeling this case will be unusual. Quickly settling into the car, which was ready to go, the well-coordinated trio, led by Eleanor Peterson, set off. The night city was slowly cooling down from the daytime heat. George sometimes even felt that the softened asphalt was melting under the wheels of the old Gazelle van. But there was no time to think about it. He drove the car carefully and quickly. If the road remained as deserted, they would arrive in about an hour. Eleanor Peterson, sitting next to the driver, thought, I should have put Chloe and George together. At this hour, while George was driving the car at maximum speed, Chloe was lost in sad contemplation in the back compartment of the car. She had 30 years behind her, not the easiest ones, an orphan since the 3rd grade. Her family was that rare exception when it wasn't the father, engrossed in other women, who disappeared from the house one beautiful autumn evening. It all started when her mother left. She fell in love with a young colleague, a cook, and went with him to the ends of the earth. Wasn't moving to Norilsk for 5 years to manage production at a newly opened restaurant the end of the earth? After such betrayal by his wife, Chloe's father seemed to lose control. He methodically went through the apartment, carefully searching for any images of his wife. He tore up the wedding photos that stood on the dresser and behind the glass in the wall unit. He destroyed all traces of little Chloe's mother in the bathroom. When he accidentally knocked an old bottle of perfume, forgotten by his wife, off the shelf, it shattered with a pathetic crunch on the tiled floor. The man stood and stomped on the shards, as if trampling the remnants of his love into the hard surface. The bathroom continued to smell strongly and persistently of Mom for a long time afterward. Chloe was only 10 years old then. She couldn't understand what was wrong with her if her mother had left her with her dad without even saying goodbye. The word love was unknown to her. Her parents hadn't shown much romance in front of her. They were reserved and businesslike. Later, analysing her childhood, or rather what she remembered of it, Chloe made a vow to herself. I will elevate my chosen one to the heavens with my warm affection. I will not repeat my parents' mistakes. The girl's father drowned his sorrow in a peculiar way. He didn't resort to the bottle. He buried himself in work. The man, abandoned by his wife, worked as a plumber. He was such a master that people would queue up for him for a couple of months if they needed an expensive bathtub or toilet installed in a luxury apartment without a hitch, without scratching any of the luxurious sides. No one around suspected that the miracle plumber had set a grand goal: to earn a fabulous amount of money, fly to his wife in Norilsk, and prove to her that he was the one from whom people don't run away. In a beautiful tin box that had held walnut halva, the master collected banknotes of various denominations, never allowing himself to spend even a couple of rubles on beer. The wad grew, became plump, and warmed his hands pleasantly with its weight. Meanwhile, the object of his dreams there in the north, finding herself in an unfamiliar environment with cold realities, couldn't cope. The tragedy was so banal that the neighbours, learning that the recently arrived restaurant manager had decided to walk a couple of blocks home in a fierce blizzard, merely shook their heads. Little Chloe's mother got lost in the snow trap. After just a couple of steps, the snowflakes weren't falling gently as she was used to. They descended like a dark, icy, piercing flock of large predatory birds. Her mouth and nose were blocked, and she couldn't breathe. The fatal winter seemed to hit her knees with a stick. She sat down helplessly in a snowdrift. She had no strength to scream or call for help. When, an hour later, her worried husband didn't find his friend at home, he organized a search. When the woman was found, she was still alive. She passed away quietly in the hospital later. Her southern body couldn't cope with pneumonia. Thus, Chloe became half an orphan, but they learned about this much later. The criminal story involving Chloe's father could easily have been the plot of a detective novel. After his wife's sudden departure, he worked like a man possessed for a year. Finally, he accumulated a sum that seemed to him a strong argument for his wife's return. He dressed up, straightened himself up. But there was a hitch. There were no direct flights from his city to that distant land. He had to first get to a larger airport by train. His fellow travellers in the compartment seemed like nice guys. They had elite French cognac in their bag. He couldn't even pronounce the names properly. He had Ossetian pies from the nearby bakery, a couple of his favourite juicy lemons, and a chocolate bar. Chloe's father had a notorious sweet tooth. They had a hearty dinner. He didn't even immediately realise that he was drifting. His thoughts became sluggish. He was completely relaxed. He started telling his new friends the story of his life. Even traitorous tears welled up in his eyes. When his neighbours suggested playing Durac, fool, he didn't suspect how much of a gambler he was. He had held cards in his hands no more than a dozen times in his life. So, when someone remarked, "Well, you're something, you've already ruined us. We should let you play for money, you lucky fellow. You'll leave us penniless in no time," he reacted with enthusiasm. Who would refuse to so easily replenish their money bag? They put 10 rubles on the line, a ridiculous sum, just for fun. Before the eyes of the unlucky traveller, the paper pictures with kings and queens whirled as if in a mystical trick. He could barely keep track of what to discard from the fan of colourful portraits next. Chloe's father lost the first 1,000 to his cheerful companions purely out of interest for a little excitement. How that sum grew 100-fold in about an hour, he couldn't even comprehend. His head felt like lead, his eyes were heavy, and he desperately wanted to sleep. The last thing he heard as he sank into a viscous doze was Mick. Then silence and darkness. For some reason, it seemed to him that he was no longer sitting in the compartment on the comfortably made bed by the conductor, but swaying with the carriage in some narrow metal space. A sharp screeching of metal, cold wind, damp drops of rare rain on his face. Flying. Chloe's father's body was found a couple of weeks later in dense roadside growth completely by chance, between 2 settlements near the railway line. Even mushroom pickers and summer residents rarely appeared in these places. But here a loving couple had wandered into the forest belt. They arrived by bicycle, spent time alone away from curious eyes. They were already getting ready to go home to the village. A red rag in the bushes, which turned out to be a coloured sports bag, attracted their attention. Then there was a long process of identifying the deceased and searching for relatives. That's when it turned out that Chloe's mother was also no longer alive. Where the money intended for the family reunion had gone, how the man ended up near the railway track, no one ever found out. There was a person, and he vanished for nothing. Chloe, left in the care of a kind neighbour while her father went to Norilsk, was sent to an orphanage by the guardianship authorities. New walls, a new life there. She was a sociable girl. Other children in state institutions withdraw. She, on the contrary, seemed to open up to her peers and caregivers. In studies and all activities, the lively Chloe, with a mop of brown hair, brown eyes the colour of burnt caramel, and a slender figure, was ahead of everyone. Her favourite subjects were biology and chemistry. Her hobby was participating in theatrical productions. But even in sports competitions and hikes among the girls, you couldn't find a better little nurse. During one of the school excursions, Chloe's classmates stepped on a rusty nail. A bad spot, a bad wound. Even the gym teacher and the young caregiver were at a loss. It was over a kilometre to the camp with the experienced elderly doctor Martha Davies. Blood spurted from the ragged hole like a fountain, scarlet and gushing. For a few seconds, Chloe, along with the others, examined the wound. Then no one could even tell how the fearless girl fashioned a tourniquet above the injured surface from a rope that appeared out of nowhere, and even shouted to the stunned crowd, "Write down the time I tied it for Martha Davies, and quickly give me a note here." She tore her own white cotton shirt into improvised bandages in a flash. With commands like, "Quick, the first aid kit. See what disinfectants there are, since some scatterbrain forgot to put a fresh batch of sterile bandages in it before the hike." A little later, the gym teacher, recovering from the shock, draped his windbreaker over the girl's shoulders as she was left in a thin top. With the help of 2 students, he fashioned a makeshift stretcher from branches. The boy could barely walk, limping and grimacing in pain. Later, in the orphanage's medical office, Martha Davies said to Chloe after the ambulance left, "I just heard the paramedics praising you for such skilled first aid. But it's you they should be singing odes to, not me, an old crow. I didn't check before the hike that the first aid kit was poorly stocked. A disgrace to my grey head. Where did you pick up all this professional knowledge, child?" Chloe laughed and replied, "I don't know myself. Firstly, I love films and TV shows about doctors. Secondly, it's as if someone is sitting inside me and whispering, 'Pick this up and do this like that.'" So it naturally happened that Chloe chose her future profession not out of necessity for mandatory schooling after the orphanage, but out of great sincere love. The Gazelle van with the medical crew laboriously climbed a small rise at the end of the street and stopped at the house at the address, Prince Street, 10. Eleanor Peterson deftly grabbed the bag and walked quickly to the gate. Chloe, delayed for a couple of seconds, was already standing behind her, as usual, covering her back. An old copper doorbell was visible on the wooden gate, and Eleanor thought, "What a relic! It probably hasn't worked for ages." But the doorbell didn't fail, announcing the empty street in the pre-dawn silence with a clear voice. Confident footsteps sounded behind the gate, and the next moment it swung open. A silent scene. The audience could have stood up and filled the surroundings with thunderous applause. Standing before Eleanor Peterson was her husband Michael in person, who had left for a business trip that morning. Seeing his wife, the husband said in a stammering voice, "Please come in. The girl is in the house in the back room." Eleanor and Chloe rushed to the house. Iron hammers rang in Eleanor's head. All questions later. Now the main thing is the girl and her life. But what does all this mean? Where is Michael from? What connects him to this little girl? The vestibule smelled persistently of dusty rugs piled near the entrance door. The overall lack of tidiness, clearly a constant state here, caught the eye. In the next room, the aromas of yesterday's borscht, which had undergone multiple boilings, and a little cinnamon lingered. The little patient lay on a small sofa. Next to her, a young woman of rather exotic appearance was fluttering about. Seeing the mom, Eleanor was indeed a bit flustered. Tangled dreadlocks the colour of acid fuchsia, eyes thickly lined with blackness. On her legs were jeans with huge fashionable rips, on her body a shapeless t-shirt with a strange pattern. The thought beat like a helpless bird in her head again. Michael. What is her Michael doing here? A lover of impeccable cleanliness and classic style. By definition, he cannot be here. But he was standing nearby, looking at her with the piteous eyes of a sick dog. Chloe felt the absurdity of the situation and commanded in a loud voice, "Everyone step back, let the doctor examine the girl, and you, Mom, quickly tell us everything." The little one lying on the pillow was so much like Michael that Eleanor's heart almost stopped. It definitely skipped a couple of beats. It became clear that her larynx was affected by angioedema. The girl was barely breathing. There were traces of hives on her face. The little one involuntarily reached her hand towards the nasty spots, trying to scratch them. Surprisingly, Michael took it upon himself to answer the medic's questions, as if Eleanor Peterson had been doused with ice water, and he plunged in head first, as if stepping into a whirlpool. "My daughter and I were at the circus today. They have touring performers with little ponies. Our girl is crazy about horses." In the second act, when the pony show started, Lily started coughing, and then her face swelled up before our eyes. I immediately knew something was wrong. We went to the first aid station at the circus, where they gave my daughter an antihistamine. The swelling went down instantly. We went home. At home, everything was normal at first, and then Lils started wheezing. I found sawdust from the circus arena in her hands. It turned out that when one of the ponies was giving her a ride during the intermission, she had picked up a handful of chopped wooden blocks from the floor. She kept sniffing them to remember how beautiful her horse was. I suspect it's a severe allergy. Eleanor listened to his monologue and couldn't believe her ears. My daughter and I went home. A lump in her throat made it hard to breathe. How could this be? In an instant, rainbow circles swam before her eyes, and she met Chloe's gaze. And she understood. The doctor was unwell. Their Eleanor Peterson was about to faint in the middle of this small, stuffy room. Of course, Chloe knew her boss's husband, and undoubtedly she understood that her supervising doctor knew nothing about her husband's child from another woman. With a decisive movement, the nurse seated Eleanor Peterson on a chair, waved a cotton ball with ammonia under her nose, and said just a few words. "Suspected angioedema. We'll get her to the hospital." The doctor nodded resignedly. "The condition is serious. Hope she doesn't have a bronchial spasm. Chloe, get the adrenaline and prednisolone ready. They'll buy us some time." After the injection, Lily's face began to regain its normal colour. Chloe commented, "Sir, don't just stand there like a statue. Go outside and tell our driver to get the stretcher. We'll transport the girl to the hospital. We need to try to avoid intubation. We wouldn't want to put a tube into such a little one's trachea." Eleanor Peterson acted like a robot, automatically. She only came to when they were riding in the car with Michael, sitting on either side of the girl. Lily's breathing was still intermittent, but noticeably more even. Michael didn't take his anxious eyes, full of sorrow, off the child. But Eleanor remembered something else. After that first date, when she successfully passed Latin, their relationship developed rapidly. A week later, they couldn't live a day without each other. They were unconditionally liked by both sets of parents. They got married after her 4th year, moved into Michael's grandmother's apartment. the lively old woman had moved to her younger sister's village and became engrossed in growing flowers. Now you couldn't lure her back to the city even with a treat. Eleanor and Michael lived in perfect harmony, arguing or sorting things out. That wasn't them. Always and in everything, complete unanimity. The sturdy Michael worked as a swimming coach at a children's sports school. Ellybug was successfully finishing medical school, planning to do a residency. But she couldn't decide on a specialization. She joked, "I see myself as an ophthalmologist in a starched coat, and an ENT doctor in an office with lots of shining instruments looks excellent too." Fate forced her to make a choice. After defending her diploma as if on a command from above, "Now you can," Eleanor got pregnant. 9 months later, another sturdy little one was born, a son, Ethan. Their Ethy, their love and joy. He developed textbook perfectly. As the happy father often joked, "Time to sit," Ethan sat confidently. "Time to walk," he toddled briskly. Eleanor then somewhat neglected medicine, trying to spend more time with her son, as if intuition told her that this carefree time wouldn't last long. Trouble knocked on their happy family's door when Ethan turned 3. Eleanor's mentor, who had always said she had a talent for medicine, hinted another 6 months, and no medical institution would be happy to have her. This profession loves those who don't get distracted by themselves and constantly improve. Even before that, learning she would soon be a mother, Eleanor sharply changed her plans regarding specialization. She designated the smallest as her future patients, infants, newborns. She decided to become a neonatologist. She meticulously studied pathologies in babies who had just come into the world. She spent all her time in the pediatric intensive care unit. And then the fervour subsided. Ethy occupied all her thoughts and time. To return to her chosen field, Eleanor needed to immerse herself in the thick of things in a department where there was a place for a budding paediatrician. The healthy Ethan went to kindergarten. Michael continued his work with his charges. Everything in their family flowed along the planned course. A couple of months later, Ethan's teacher asked Eleanor to drop by after work. There she shared her observations and concerns with the mother. But first, she asked, "Haven't you noticed anything strange about your son lately?" Eleanor raised her eyebrows in surprise, her astonished eyes wide open. "My husband and I work a lot. We see Ethan more often in the evening, but he seems healthy and cheerful. What exactly has worried you?" "We were preparing for the morning performance. The folk dances weren't working out for the little ones." Ethan did another circle around the music room with his partner, suddenly turned pale, and sat down on a chair. "I didn't pay attention then. But your son has started stopping more and more often while walking. It started to seem to me that at that moment a blue tinge appears around his lips. Yesterday there was a routine checkup by the local paediatrician. She advised us to see a paediatric cardiologist." "I'm a doctor myself, a paediatrician. I couldn't have missed anything in my son," Eleanor retorted sharply to the teacher. And to herself she thought, "Or could I?" Without delay, the next day she took Ethan to her department. The doctor's verdict was staggering. "Your son has a rare form of heart defect that manifests around the age of 3 or 4. The only salvation is urgent surgery. Otherwise, he won't live 6 months. His condition will worsen. Such a complex operation is impossible here. There is experience in Moscow. Cardiothoracic surgeons in Germany, Switzerland, and Israel are good." Eleanor and Ethan walked home slowly. It seemed to her that the boy would get sick now, his heart wouldn't hold out. Michael rushed from school as soon as she called, and she studied textbooks, notes, literature. Everything indicated that the outcome, favourable or fatal, was like a swing, 50-50. Where to find the point of balance that would swing it in the right direction? The cost of the rare surgery in Moscow seemed astronomical. Time flew. Eleanor and Michael couldn't raise the sum. Even selling the grandmother's apartment with her consent and moving to a one-room apartment on the outskirts didn't balance the scales. When a charity fund intervened, things moved forward. Finally, the surgery and treatment were paid for, tickets were bought, and things were packed. Ethan died on the operating table. The swing didn't tilt towards their family happiness. There was no negligence, no mistake, no serious preconditions, except for the disease itself. Eleanor understood this as a doctor, but her heart froze when the surgeon came out and spread his hands. Without words, they understood everything. No scream, no sigh, only a tighter embrace in which they seemed to stand the entire time their son was being saved under the cold light of fluorescent lamps. They returned home devastated. Eleanor kept repeating, "It's Time's fault. We lost it while we were raising money. If we had come earlier, everything would have been fine." Then she took retraining courses for emergency medicine. It became important for her to manage to save at least someone else's child. That's when she first told her husband her motto: "We are always responsible for everything. It's just that some people live their whole lives without understanding this." 2 years after Ethan's death, Michael started talking about a second child. She herself couldn't explain why she felt that way. She didn't want to give birth anymore, didn't want to have another child. All her strength, abilities, and skills from now on, she wanted to dedicate to children in trouble, sick, suffering, but not her own. Michael resigned himself, didn't bring up the subject again, didn't hint. He was there, achingly dear. And now they were riding side by side with his daughter from a strange, incomprehensible girl. Eleanor Peterson didn't even want to call her mother in her thoughts. As if in a delirium, only one thought reigned at the bottom of her soul. What could her husband possibly have in common with this feathered marvel? On a distant June day, when Michael was strolling along the park alleys, it wouldn't have occurred to him that on one of the benches, fate was waiting for him in the form of a girl with magnificent grey-green eyes, more beautiful than any in the world. The pretty girl, contrary to his masculine understanding, was tracing her lips with a pen, twisting a strand of hair around her finger, wrinkling her nose, chewing a sandwich, washing it down with a drink, and turning pages again. And she did it all simultaneously, without getting confused. Michael froze in his tracks and, as pompous as it sounds, was lost. He fell in love at first sight. His legs carried him to the bench. Then he got a little flustered and blurted out the first thing that came to mind. She didn't hesitate to speak her mind, suggested they introduce themselves, and agreed to go to an ice cream parlour. In any love story, there are two faces, two participants, two heroes. If someone were to write down the memories of Michael and Eleanor, they would get two similar novellas. They understood that they loved each other and wanted to be together. They were close, friendly, and understood each other. They lived, waited, raised Ethan. Everything the same, everything shared, everything split in half. Together they faced a tragedy without equal. Their son was gone, they remained. Against the laws of nature, the elders outlived the younger. That trip to the picturesque resort of Sochi, preparing for the Olympics, was unusual from the start. The Games were a year and a half away. Construction was booming in the city. The coach and the team, tested out a new hotel and cafe in Krasnaya Poliana, intended for foreigners. After admiring the mountains, swimming in the sea, and winning the competitions, everyone was going home happy. When buying tickets, it turned out that too many professionals were travelling to and from Sochi. Tickets became scarce. The coach was forced to buy a ticket in a first-class compartment, a two-berth one. His neighbour turned out to be a girl. As it happened, she was going home on vacation. Her ticket was also bought at the last moment. Pug-nosed, blue-eyed, cheerful. And as for her being short on brains and constantly babbling nonsense, well, Michael wasn't planning on christening children with her anyway. Athletic build, with a muscular figure, serious brown eyes, he always appealed to women. But that didn't interest him. He was tied to his Ellie bug by shared joys and sorrows, as if by ropes. He paid little attention to others, even if they showed him unambiguous attention. The girl in the compartment was about 10 years younger. When he entered, she was engrossed in eating a potato pie, washing it down with cola. She nodded in greeting, introduced herself. "Sarah, I'm going on vacation. I've been painting almost non-stop for 9 months on sites. The foreman gave me a whole 2 weeks. Come on, sit down. Why are you frozen? We have to sit here for almost another day." Michael, stunned by the monologue, sat down on the second bunk. The train started moving, and the Sochi station drifted past the window. 10 minutes later, the guys showed up, starting to tease the coach. "Boss, maybe we should switch places. Such a girl is travelling with you. Don't disgrace the team's victory here." It was easy with Sarah. She didn't flirt, didn't simper, didn't tease. She offered him pies, took his sandwich, went to get coffee, waving it off. "Some things are for women. I'm already 23. I just look like a little shrimp because of my height." The train glided smoothly along the tracks. Day turned into an inky night with stars. Michael and Sarah discussed premieres, celebrity morals, Sochi. They told a couple of jokes. The conversation didn't flow further, and they decided to go to bed. Michael leafed through newspapers. Sarah rustled a detective novel. Boredom. Both, without a word, lay on their sides with their backs to their fellow traveller, pretending to be asleep. Half an hour later, Michael dozed off. He woke up to hands stroking his shoulders. "Don't be scared, brave coach. You're so rugged. You're too much. It's hard to resist." Michael flinched, stood up abruptly, turned to Sarah. "What are you doing?" "Fellow traveller, I told you I was married. Or are you and your wife never going to stray?" "Of course not," the man growled angrily, and inside a predator's excitement awakened. Sarah instantly caught the change. Well, and then what happened, happened. In the morning they barely spoke. "No, I won't have coffee, thank you." Even the bold Sarah from the evening before didn't look up, as if ashamed. In their city, they went their separate ways. The memories of that night were strange. For some reason, he didn't even consider it cheating. And then the unexpected happened. In the middle of autumn, Michael was locking up the changing room when the security guard called him. "Mike, some girl is looking for you." Going downstairs, Michael saw with surprise his fellow traveller from Sochi at the school entrance. She beckoned him over and said through clenched teeth, "I've had so many partners, but getting pregnant like this after just one night, that's never happened. Listen, coach, abortions are expensive these days. You'll have to help me out with the money." Michael couldn't believe his ears. He could become a father again. He could have a son or a daughter. He would give half his life for such an opportunity. Grabbing Sarah by the elbow, he dragged her around the corner onto the sports field. He sat her down on the bleachers and said loudly and clearly, You will have this child for me, and I'll be there, not as your husband, don't even hope for that, but as their father. Just you dare harm the baby, you'll regret it." Sarah resisted, shouting, "Who are you to make me waste my youth and life on your offspring? Found yourself a surrogate mother, a free one. Someone will ask me to marry them later, and I'll have your baggage." They sat down for negotiations again. They discussed the terms. Michael would help financially with everything, come at her first request. The child's fate would be decided after birth. In return, she would maintain a healthy lifestyle for 7 months, doing nothing harmful. They found out it would be a girl after the ultrasound. Sarah unexpectedly softened. "Didn't want a boy, but a girl. I'll think about whether to keep her myself or give her to you, Daddy, as a gift. You were happy, weren't you?" Michael looked at her and thought, how could I have been so weak on the train next to such a woman? He was preparing for a conversation with Eleanor, wanted to tell her everything, confess, but kept putting it off. Let the girl be born, then he would confess to his beloved. Lily was born quickly, healthy. 5 days later, Michael picked Sarah up from the maternity hospital. The lively painter quieted down, treated the baby carefully, tenderly. Either it was maternal instinct, or the girl was pretty, quiet, calm. As if she felt the wrongness of her appearance. Dad and Mum don't live together, there's no normal family. 3 months later, Michael suggested Sarah arrange for him to adopt the child so she could be free. The refusal was sharp. Moreover, Sarah insisted he tell his wife nothing. Otherwise, she would keep him away from Lily. At first, Michael was torn. He wanted to involve lawyers, fight for his daughter, watch to see if Sarah treated the girl well. There was nothing to fault her on. The painter had even saved a decent sum for the child. He couldn't catch her on a material hook. Time passed. Michael got used to visiting the second home, where Lily would greet him with joyful squeals. Sometimes they went for walks, had lunch or dinner like adults, Dad, Mom, daughter. Eleanor fanatically spent time at work, taking extra shifts. She didn't pay attention to her husband's absences, but if they were home together, she was almost the same, kind, affectionate, attentive. The ambulance, tired from its night vigils, slowed down at the reception area of the children's hospital. A few moments later, orderlies were carrying the stretcher with Lily into the examination room. The doctors bustled about, reassuring everyone that the girl's life was not in danger. Eleanor Peterson's crew's mission was complete. They had brought the girl. Michael stayed with his daughter. Eleanor had to return to the station. Later that evening, her husband would tell her everything honestly about those events on the train long ago. Eleanor would be almost calm by then, surprised that she didn't consider her husband's brief affair a crime. It was as if she felt his craving for this girl, in whom his dream of a child was embodied. People have different destinies, and the heavens help them find the happiness of fatherhood in different ways. After that, things even became interesting for them. Eleanor advised on what doll to buy for the discharge, bought sweets and gifts. One day she asked, "Mike, why does Lily's mother look so strange?" Michael explained that the changes in Sarah had started recently. Neither of them suspected what the pink dreadlocks and mannerisms would lead to. Sarah had fallen in love with a new painter. He called himself a free nomadic artist. During breaks, he would paint her portrait on the wall and then paint over it. Sarah was captivated, got the same dreadlocks. He advised her on the colour. The artist didn't ask her out, didn't look at her languidly, didn't shower her with gifts, didn't hint at closeness. He captivated her with his bohemian spirit, charm, sophistication, and aristocracy. What wind had brought the genius to their construction site, Sarah didn't ask. She prayed that this Mary Poppins in male form wouldn't disappear from her horizon. Now she imitated her idol in everything. She dressed like her idol, smoked thin cigarettes like a god, ate like a prince, rolls, wasabi, Italian wine, cheese with mould. She paid less attention to Lily, only pretending to be an ideal mother when Michael was around. He didn't feel any anxiety about the changes. By the New Year holidays, Sarah felt that love was about to take flight. The nomad revealed that he never stayed anywhere longer than 2 to 3 months. He got bored. He had dropped out of art school. The urge for change of scenery had won. Sarah rushed after him 2 weeks after the longing appeared in his eyes. But first, she prepared. She knew that Michael had no secrets from his wife. She invited both of them to a cafe to talk. Ordering coffee and pastries to sweeten the pill, she didn't beat around the bush. "I've met the man of my life. That's what they call such love, I think. I'm ready to follow him to the ends of the earth. Lily is now surplus to requirements for me. God knows I wasn't always a bad mother. I was attached in my own way. Now I want to arrange my personal life. If you want, Michael, arrange the papers. I'll give you my daughter and leave." Eleanor was shocked by this offer. She didn't object to Michael's daughter living with them, but how could a mother abandon her child like that? The image of Eton swam before her eyes, and her heart ached. "If you had come back, my dear, I would never have given you away to anyone." Aloud she said, "We are always responsible for those close to us. Michael, you haven't said a word, and I, as always, am rushing ahead. We agree, Sarah, to take your daughter into our family. Arrange the documents, we will sign and collect everything." For adoption, easily bypassing bureaucratic hurdles, Michael and Eleanor adopted Lily in the shortest possible time. The girl had always adored her father. Her mother's departure was explained as a vital necessity, and she quickly found common ground with Aunt Eleanor. Crowded but happy. Now a little bell-like voice constantly echoed in their small apartment, participating in everything. Lily hung laundry with her dad, helping Aunt Eleanor. Then the female half would bake pancakes and call the head of the family for tea. The story could have ended here. But it is not for us to decide how fate will dispose. It prepared new trials. Another crew was supposed to go to the collapsed building. Someone in the heavenly office decided otherwise. A nurse from another crew slipped on the steps of the station. The first frosts had arrived, and the treachery of black ice was forgotten. Somewhere near the collapsed building, injured people were waiting, and the medic's leg was swelling, clearly a fracture. Eleanor Peterson's group was urgently rerouted to the accident site. As always, the composed Chloe, the indispensable George, the focused Eleanor. Everyone was there. Even Chloe didn't argue that she would ride in the back, but quickly got into the cabin with George. There was no time for arguments. A couple of days ago, Eleanor and Chloe had a serious conversation outside of work. They were close friends and used you. They maintained subordination only at work. The doctor started the conversation, but she wasn't scolding her for mistakes, but about George. "Don't you have a heart, Chloe? The station is buzzing that George is pining for you, and you're acting like a stranger. He's good in every way, appearance, character, and a scar only makes a man more handsome." "And what do you suggest, Ellybug? He acts like the devil whenever I touch him. Am I contagious? He touches me and jumps back. How am I supposed to understand that reaction? And you say he's in love. That's a lie." Now Chloe was riding next to George, and again couldn't help but admire his masculine profile. The scar, cutting across his eyebrow and flowing like a snake towards his beautifully shaped lips, no longer frightened her. George was attractive with that kind of masculine beauty that promises protection and strength. It remained a mystery why he deliberately kept his distance. If he loved her, why act like that? George was afraid to get closer than a meter to Chloe. He loved this cheerful person too much to offend her with an involuntary display of interest. And now, as soon as Chloe turned away, he would quickly glance, admiring her understated beauty. When the nurse turned her head back, George sat straight, looking at the road. A crowd had gathered in front of the house where the collapse had occurred on the 3rd floor of the old building. It buzzed like 100 bumblebees, filled with rumours, fed by the rescuers' anxious reports, only to buzz again. "Did you hear? A girl is trapped under something heavy on the 1st floor. She's screaming in pain, and the rescuers can't get through." Hearing this, the thin Eleanor Peterson commanded, "Chloe, prepare the painkiller. I'll try to crawl to the little one." At these words, George and Chloe turned around. "No, boss. The house might collapse until the rescuers give the all clear." "No time to be afraid," the brave woman replied. "There's a child alone, scared, in pain. What's the point of an ambulance if it's as slow as a turtle?" With a syringe in her hand, Eleanor Peterson rushed towards the building where firefighters and emergency services were working. "Woman, where are you going?" "I'll crawl to the girl, give her an injection. I'm an ambulance doctor." "There's a narrow passage. No one could get through." "And I'll try." Debris, plaster, paint streaks, dust. Eleanor first got on her knees, then crawled, mentally thanking her husband for making her stay in shape, swimming, jogging. At the end of the crawl space, she saw a girl pinned by a metal door. The little one's legs were pressed by a slab and stuck out towards the exit as if the child had been running. She turned around and shouted clearly, "2 thin men can fit here. The girl is pinned by the door, but I'm giving her a painkiller." "Don't shout, for God's sake," whispered a voice. "Loud sounds are dangerous." After a couple of minutes, the little one quieted down. Eleanor began to push the door with her shoulder, with difficulty, but the massive object moved. Rustling sounds came from behind, and the woman whispered, "The girl is relaxed from the injection. She's gone limp. Pull her by the legs and I'll push the door." Together, things went faster. The men pulled the girl through the labyrinth. The way back didn't seem unknown. Eleanor hesitated for a couple of minutes. Outside, people didn't understand what had happened. A crash. The building collapsed like a house of cards. Only 2 managed to get out with the girl in their arms. Eleanor Peterson, the well-known doctor, was buried forever by the debris. The calm, composed Chloe screamed hysterically, rushing to George, who wrapped his arms around her and stroked her head. It seemed to both of them that their Ellie bug had been swallowed by a greedy monster opening its maw of debris. Lured in, swallowed. People were bustling around. Someone said that the fate of 4 more residents was unknown. Eleanor's widowed crew stood in the middle of the chaos, embracing. A little later, realizing their presence wasn't needed, they walked to the car, their arms still linked. They had to go to Michael to deliver the bitter news. 2 weeks passed. George and Chloe had a new doctor, an elderly paediatrician from the polyclinic. Silent, stern, but qualified. But the nurse and driver felt that the soul had left the crew. Everything was as usual, and yet nothing was. They didn't want to go to work. On the day Eleanor Peterson passed away, they immediately went to her home. Lily was at kindergarten. Michael was packing a bag for training. Chloe had never seen such a reaction to sad news. After their account of Eleanor's last moments, darkness spread across Michael's face. His eyes had just been alive, shining. The light went out, his skin turned ashen grey. How could they comfort him? Everything said seemed empty, useless. Chloe and George understood that they were superfluous in the middle of this scorched desert. They didn't want to separate. A strong thread connected the pair who had witnessed the tragedy. They came to Chloe's apartment together after their shift. It seemed that words weren't needed to explain how much time they had lost. Chloe prepared food, as if she had done it 1,000 times. Both had such an appetite after the stress that a huge pan of potatoes with eggs was eaten in 5 minutes. Before, George had thought that if Chloe were near, he would pounce like a wolf. It happened differently. The tenderness he felt for this woman was such that in a little while longer he would melt. George felt such happiness, as if there hadn't been long torments of waiting. When Chloe fell into a troubled sleep, he couldn't sleep. He checked, wondering if he was imagining it. She was sleeping on his shoulder, his woman, his dream. He was struck by the warmth with which Chloe touched his scar, kissed the line, looked into his eyes. Did she like the affection? She acted as if a hero, a protector, a support was beside her. He remembered the disgust on his wife's face after the hospital. They didn't say, "I love you, I need you, you're needed." In their story, everything had been said long ago. Now they were proving that it wasn't a mistake, that it was worth enduring and waiting for everything to be like this now. In the morning, Chloe said calmly, "George, why don't you go home and get your things? My apartment is closer to work and more spacious. Later we'll decide what to do with your place. We'll combine our efforts and trade our properties for something bigger." George didn't know quiet family comfort. With his wife, they lived in separation. He felt rootless, cold. They were together, but the feeling that they were living separately never left him. He threw himself into his work. With his Chloe, everything was different. He felt a newfound confidence that he was needed and important. Even when he went to the supermarket for groceries, she managed to miss him and greeted him warmly, as if he had returned from distant travels. Michael lived as if in a daze after Eleanor's death. In the morning, he mechanically made sandwiches, coffee, stirred porridge for Lils. The girl became his salvation, his solace, his light. In his free time, he couldn't stay in the tiny apartment. His and Eleanor's parents deteriorated sharply after the grief, turning into helpless old people. Both families sought solace in working the land. They planted fanatically, finding oblivion. They tried not to think, not to remember. They didn't take their granddaughter, unable to cope with the lively, curious child. On weekends, Michael took his daughter hiking. They would go to the river, set up a tent, wander through the steppe, collecting flowers for Eleanor's grave. They always stopped by the cemetery on the way back. Michael would sit on the bench and talk to the departed for a long time. He would tell her how the week had gone, boast about his charge's victories. Eleanor in the photo would look at him with her grey-green eyes and smile that smile from which she loved to announce her motto. "We are responsible for everything. If you commit, go to the bitter end." After the cemetery, Michael would feel better for a while. He noticed carefree, laughing women irritated him. If he came across a giggling woman, he would watch her go and think angrily, "I wonder, darling, would you have stepped under the ruins of a building if a stranger's child was crying there?" A dark resentment enveloped him. Why were they alive, and his Ellybug was gone forever? Lils grew up all at once, turning into a wise little old woman. After kindergarten, she didn't fuss. Buckwheat porridge with sausages was the best food. The story of Cinderella was a new discovery every time. She wasn't afraid to stay alone if Michael had to go out. Afterwards she would ask, "Are you tired? Shall I put the kettle on? Let me take your socks to the bathroom." She had lost a second mum, but she didn't ask, "When is Mum coming back?" or "Why are we living alone?" They were comfortable in their orphaned solitude. They understood each other with half a word. Sometimes in the evening, George and Chloe would drop by with pastries. They would have tea parties. They remembered Eleanor with light sadness. All four of them loved her, and everyone missed her. Michael desperately wanted to leave the city where everything reminded him of the past. But where would he find a team? His wife's grave was here, his elderly parents nearby. His desire didn't align with reality. They decided to mark the anniversary of Eleanor Peterson's death at a cafe. Former colleagues took care of everything. Michael, Lily, and his parents were brought to a ready table. George and Chloe had recently gotten married and were expecting an addition. They had moved into a new apartment, buying it with the money from selling their old homes. Many warm words were said about Eleanor at the table. No one wanted to leave. This time Michael's parents wanted to take the girl for a couple of days. They missed her. After seeing off the guests, Michael ambled home through the park where they had met. The same bench under the chestnut tree, the same alleys sheltering lovers. A group was having fun, 3 young men. They surrounded a girl, not letting her take a step. Michael's eyes darkened. The target of the young men was a copy of Ellybug in her youth, a thin reed with a mop of hair. The girl stood helplessly between the guys, clutching her handbag. The guys grinned, tightening the circle. Michael quickened his pace. "Hey guys, don't you think the lady doesn't want to talk?" One loosened his grip, turned his head and hissed, "Mister, you should just keep walking. We'll sort things out with our friend here ourselves." A shiver of rage ran through Michael's body, turning into a volcanic inferno. It was infinitely important to save the girl, not to let them mock her. Even if the group knew her, even if she wasn't in danger, it was important to rescue her and take her away. "Looks like the quick fellow didn't understand. Go another way, passerby. We're locals here, you're surplus." Michael glanced at the girl. Despair swam in her green eyes. She was silent, her gaze pleading for help. Michael couldn't be mistaken. She was uncomfortable. "The girl is coming with me," he declared, "or you'll regret crossing our paths." "Look at this funny guy." One stepped away, started pacing. "He doesn't understand the first time. Got a feisty one." The guy pulled out a knife, its steel flashing. "How do you like this argument? Knight saving a stranger's honour. How do you prefer it? Tickle your throat with this toy, or shall we check if our darling likes such games?" Michael, who often visited the neighbours who rented a martial arts hall, wasn't afraid of attacks. Now it was important that they didn't touch her, the copy of Ellybug. The guys abandoned their victim, who froze, and surrounded Michael. This turn of events only egged him on. He had had a couple of drinks, and the rest was fueled by hatred for the scumbags who considered themselves masters in his park. How much older was he? 10 years, no more, almost the same generation. But in the eyes of his opponents, there was so much cruelty, a craving for lawlessness, that it went beyond any bounds. The fight started abruptly. The guy with the knife immediately scratched his shoulder. The strongest one looked him in the eye, trying to win morally. The girl stood aside, her mouth open. "Get out of here," Michael shouted, "so I don't see hide nor hair of you." But the young lady didn't give up. She shook her head vigorously. I won't leave you alone. They've been harassing me for a long time. They caught me alone. We study at the university. The boys are from the elite, and I'm from an orphanage like a red flag. They're interested in my life as a child. We don't abandon our own. I'll be here. Michael was distracted by the monologue, took a couple of blows to the ribs. Something crunched. A fracture, he thought with annoyance. The guy with the knife decided to have fun differently. He jumped up behind his classmate, pressed the blade to her cheek. You say, Kitty, you don't abandon your own? And if I tickle your throat, will you run? The girl, who had been as if in suspended animation until then, didn't faint. She turned around. Blood ran down her cheek. She shouted, How you've annoyed me, you creeps. Without your daddies and mummies, you're nobody. A blank space. What can you do yourselves? Take away your car, your trinkets, your card. What do you know about surviving in a pack of teenagers? No one expected such resistance. The guys went wild, their faces darkened. Putting away the knife, the opponent joined his friends. They surrounded Michael with a mass of bodies, faces contorted with malice. He didn't remember pushing the leader. He did a somersault, fell on his back. His head hit the curb. A pool of blood spread under his head. Michael, who had taken kids to the infirmary so many times, immediately knew that things were bad. Instinctively put his finger to his neck. There was no pulse. The rest was a blur. The girl was the first to come to. Ambulance, police, quick, nobody leave. The guys nervously pulled out their phones, called their parents, services, acquaintances. Michael sat on the curb, thinking frantically, Lily is at her grandparents'. I'll be arrested. What will happen to the girl? He quickly beckoned the student. What's your name? I need help. Faith, tell me. I'm Michael. Here's a note with an address, keys, the phone number of my friends George and Chloe. My daughter is at my parents'. Pick her up and give her to my friends. They'll take care of her. When the police, ambulance, a crowd of people arrived, Michael was calm. As they say never to prison or poverty. Apparently, it was his turn to taste prison life. Look how many important people have arrived, ordering the officers around. Perhaps it was lucky he was immediately taken to the car. Otherwise, the unleashed dogs of the deceased's father would have finished him off on the spot. Faith, whom he had saved, was hovering nearby. She managed to show the ambulance crew a cut to get a certificate. She rattled off information to the detectives, the investigator. They were all brought to the police station together. They immediately took his documents, his phone. While they were sorting things out, Faith scurried away like a mouse, made some calls. Meeting Michael's gaze, she gave him a thumbs up. The mechanism of care was launched. She turned out to be a fearless firecracker, always managing to be everywhere. In court, she presented everything in such a way that the rich relatives turned pale from her frankness. She found witnesses that the trio had been harassing her for a long time. She was respected in her group. These guys were not liked. The picture for the victim turned out to be unflattering. Undoubtedly, Michael didn't want to harm the boy. It was too cruel a boomerang. But things happened as they did. He was given 5 years in a general regime colony for exceeding the limits of self-defense. Faith's participation helped the judge make an optimal decision. The prosecution insisted on 8 years. The judge leaned towards the first option. Michael didn't know how George and Chloe had arranged it with social services, but Lily was placed with them for the duration of his sentence. Benny was born during the investigation. The ambulance crew had connections. They saved the children not only of ordinary people, but also of officials. When Chloe was allowed a visit, she reassured Michael. Don't worry, old friend. Lily is doing well with us. You and Eleanor aren't strangers to us. I'll write about her regularly. We'll come for a visit when they allow it. It's in the next region, that's not a distance. And tell me, what should I do about your little shadow? Faith visits Lil's, brings toys, asks permission to pick her up from kindergarten, take her for a walk, go to the cinema. I didn't think the girl would turn out to be such a loyal friend. They met tragically. She defended you so actively, testified fiercely in court. You never know how someone will behave in extreme conditions. She's no pushover. My God, Michael, how naive you are about relationships. She fell in love at first sight, chivalry, a protector, good looks. And you were wrong about her being a kid. She entered university after technical school. She's 23. Only a 9-year difference. She looks young because of her height, her fragility. She has the right character. Take a closer look. You can't bring Eleanor back, but you and Lily have a lot of good things ahead of you. You deserve it. The guard leading the prisoner after the visit didn't understand why he was smiling. How could he know that Michael was thinking about the possibility of happiness if this lively person waited for him? Love comes in different forms. Some exchange it for pennies, others remain the chosen one without fear or reproach. It depends on how lucky you are.